In this video, we're going to talk about buttons on a page and telling which button's been pressed, and we're going to talk about getting input fields from a page. There are two parts to doing this. One is we need the page itself. So let me slide this away. Here is the page. It's a JSP page. It's built from JSP. And let me just pop it up. So on the JSP page, we have three buttons. And notice that I gave a name to these three buttons, and the name of each of these three elements is button, which is a little bit odd, but they have different values. The next part of getting this button input is up here at the top where I say form action equals welcome. We're going to look at how this happens a little bit later, but for now just trust me that this word welcome, we're going to end up mapping that so that it calls my welcome servlet over here. And we're going to do it through this web.xml file, but we'll come back to those details later. So this is saying that when you submit by clicking on one of these three buttons, clicking on one of these three, it's going to invoke this action, welcome, and that corresponds to the welcome servlet. Now let's look at the welcome servlet. The welcome servlet, when the button is hit, it's going to go inside this do post method. And what it's going to say is, it's going to say, take the request, this is the request that came into the server from the browser, and go in that request and get a parameter named button. Now, if you remember, we said in our page, we said, hey, we do have something called button. So we grab the button and, or we get the parameter called button rather, and that is going to have the value associated with the button. So if we were to stop in the debugger right here on this line, it's basically telling which one of these three things was hit, because the value of button value will be login, create, or be anonymous. And you can kind of see the code down below here. So assuming I have a button value, that's just defensive programming there. I say, well, does the value equal create button? And if it does, I know I'm in this case. So let's look at the next part of this. Let's look at how we get the username. So in the JSP file, we have the field defined here. We say there's input, it's text, and the name of the field is username, just like over here I said the name of this element was button. So here I say, we'll get the parameter named username, the thing I used over here, and get the associated value, and that will be what the person typed in. So that's how I can tell what the button is, and that's how I can tell what the username is. So I'm going to just rattle through this one more time because it's kind of confusing the first time you see it. We have a JSP page here, and we have three buttons on it, and we have a user field on it, and these elements are named, and when I click a button, it's going to invoke what's ever associated with this action, welcome. That's going to go to the server, and it's going to call the welcome servlet. I'm going to show you why action welcome goes to the welcome servlet. And because we're doing a submit, it goes to the do post method, which has a request. From a request, we can get parameters off of that request, including the button that was pressed and the username. All right, let's see how that mapping, how can we go from action welcome to the welcome servlet. The way that happens is in this file here, web.xml. In web.xml, you define, let's see, where is it here? It is right down here. In this web.xml file, you kind of have you have a servlet defined and a servlet mapping. So one thing is saying, hey, when you see the pattern welcome, that corresponds to this action welcome. When you see that, I want you to associate that with the welcome servlet. And the other thing here says, hey, I have a welcome servlet, but that's just the a name of it I'm giving it. And whenever you want to really invoke this welcome servlet, the class that you're looking for is this UI welcome servlet. And that's just because over here I put my servlets into this package called UI. Okay, so that was kind of a wrap up on how you can create a JSP, or really, we didn't really get into JSP too much at this point, an HTML file, and tell which button was hit and get a value off the page and have that come into a servlet. Let's just look at one final piece of what's going on in the servlet. So we got the button and we got the username, and then we did something. So if it was create account, we created a user model, which is over here in my models layer, and I set the username, and then I told the user DAO to save it. And then here I say we're going to tell the server what should happen next, what should be the next thing that gets shown. And we do this by getting the dispatcher, and we're saying, hey, the next page I want you to go to, the next URI I want you to go to is view stories. Now notice view stories, that doesn't really say, it doesn't say view stories.jsp, it doesn't say view stories.html, it just says view stories. So that's another one of these servlet mappings. So if I go back in this HTML file, I'll find view stories. Oh, there it is right there. If you see view stories, I want that to correspond to the views stories servlet, and the views stories servlet corresponds to the UI view stories servlet that I've defined over here. So that's just showed you kind of this complicated thing where I hit the button, I got figured out which button it was, I grabbed user, and now I'm going to a servlet. I'm invoking another servlet rather than a page to do something else. And that's it for this video. In the next video, we're going to talk about JSPs.